In December 1911, the RMS Mauretania suffered a small collision in the Mersey River. The liner was not seriously damaged, and after a few minor repairs that took a couple of weeks, she was ready to sail again. However, there was a more immediate issue. Every December, Cunard's Mauretania was given the prestigious task of carrying Christmas mail across the Atlantic from Europe to America. With the damage to her hull, there's no way she could complete the task in time for the holiday. The Mauretania's younger sister, the RMS Lusitania, was sent in her stead. She was loaded with the Christmas mail and sent on her merry way, carrying tens of thousands of letters and packages, as well as hundreds of passengers sailing to reach loved ones in time for Christmas. The following year, Mauretania resumed her duties as the Christmas mail carrier. In the era before airline travel, with airplanes only in their infancy prior to the First World War, the only way to cross the Atlantic was with these ocean liners, and their orderly and reliable schedule was vital for anyone traveling during the holiday season. The liners traveled all over the world, wherever there was deep enough water for them to access and a mass of people that needed conveying. And these parts of the world had a wide variety of Christmas and holiday traditions which were different from the European and American Santa Claus, which we are very used to, who, by the way, at the time was not the Coca-Cola branded Santa that we see today. That started in the 1930s. But for the sake of these ships and their stories, we're going to stay oriented around the Anglo-American traditions which dominated the transatlantic routes.
Hello! Strike me think here comes Father Christmas. Oh yeah, so it is. Look at his beard.
Christmas in 1912 may look foreign and strange from what we're used to, but at its core it was very similar to today's way of celebrating. Children would write letters to Santa asking for toys or treats, and the kids would wait to find these gifts under the tree if they were good. Dinner was spent with the family, and there likely would have been plenty of music and dancing. Sometimes, however, people were not lucky enough to be home for the holidays. The steamship companies recognized this, and they often did all they could to accommodate their passengers, providing them with special meals and festivities when possible. On the earlier Cunard liners, such as those in the 1850s, what was intended to be a large special meal for saloon-class passengers was often ruined, or at least detracted from, by the inefficient facilities of the ship. Galleys, where these fine meals were cooked, were often quite a distance from the saloon, and according to early Cunard records, often required the stewards to take the food across open decks to get there, exposed to any rain or snowfall. The quality of meals on these ships was one of the main criticisms by Charles Dickens when he sailed with Cunard. When the White Star Line's Oceanic class placed saloons in the center of the ship, galleys could now be adjacent to them, letting the food stay fresh and unspoiled by the winter air. The quality of dinners, especially holiday dinners, increased to being feasts worthy of a king. Food stayed hot when served to passengers, cooks were now able to bake proper cakes, pies, and other desserts, and all 3 meals of the day were now big events. Meals on other liners, especially the Cunard, White Star, or the Norddeutscher Lloyd lines, were already extravagant every other day of the year, with chefs and stewards pulling out all the stops. So it was a bit of a challenge to find ways to step it up and make Christmas dinners something special. The food often featured selections of traditional English Christmas feasts, as evidenced by this second-class Christmas dinner menu from the RMS Olympic in 1920. Christmas dinner in second class featured a several-course meal, and since I'm not going to be memorizing the menu, I'm going to read it off for you. The first course is oxtail soup, which is not necessarily including ox, but simply beef. The second course is sirloin of beef with Yorkshire pudding. Following this is the roast gosling with applesauce. After this comes the vegetables, green corn, puree of turnips, and brown boiled potatoes. Finally, we get on to the dessert courses. Plum pudding, mince, ice cream, fruit, and coffee. I think we can all agree that this sounds like quite a meal, and it's only second class. Goose was, and is, still a very popular Christmas meal in Britain. In the United States, we may have ham or turkey or pork, but a goose is what you would find in an English home from the 1600s onward. So it's no wonder you would see it as the main course on British ships. 20 years before the Olympic menu, we see this menu from another White Star liner, the SS Afric, which ran the Indian Ocean route. Once again, we see goose and applesauce led by oxtail soup. Dinner wasn't the only big meal at Christmas. Every meal on these ships was something special. The day was started with breakfast. This 1911 Olympic first-class menu would have been very similar to what would have been served on the Titanic had she made it to winter. The menu is a bit overwhelming. I don't know about you, but the baked apples, grilled ham, the omelet, and some of those vanilla buns are the route I'd go. What about you? Leave a comment below what you would order on any of these meals. Of course, the celebrations were not simply about food. In 1921, Charles Welton writes about traveling aboard the Cunarder Aquitania. Quote, "With the coming of dawn, the saloons blossom with bright holly and festoons of green. One wonders where the decorations could have come from. It is not at all uncommon to see stately spruces, symbols of the day, introduced into the setting, a provision thoughtfully planned before the ship cast loose from the dock. Hung with an amazing variety of trinkets, draped with threads, giving forth reflections of frost, and brightened with a myriad of multicolored bulbs, they have their places on every deck." Amateur bands were assembled from the passenger lists. Talent and comedy shows were held, authors read their books, artists showed their works. Even stewards and engineers were invited to participate in these shows. This wonderful voyage each year brought together passengers and crew alike from all different backgrounds. To quote Charles once more, "Singers and dancers come out from hiding and, in costumes which cloak their identity, present their terpsichorean and vocal numbers. Then there are the musicians. What would a great passenger ship be without them? Playing about every instrument known to the trade, from the wheezy harmonica with bell attachment, right through the list of accordions, fifes, flutes, and on to the violins and cellos and the piano. These men of the ship's company are always available, with a full orchestral combination ready for immediate formation, under a director possessing the agile attributes of his kind. The regular ship's band, secure in its musical status, stands aside on occasion when novelty performers are called for. The ship's formal concert, in which on many occasions artists widely known to fame have aided, takes on a special holiday significance. There is merrymaking everywhere." According to Charles, on these Christmas voyages, the spirit of philanthropy often overtook the first-class passengers, who would, quote, "make the third-class passengers richer, yes, in actual money, than they had ever been before."
The ship was finally decorated when possible, and for fun, a few years back, when I was still involved with Titanic Honor and Glory, Kyle spent a good amount of time dressing up cabin C-55 for Christmas. Cabin C-55 is only a sitting room, attached to the bedroom of the next cabin. It's in the Regent style, with a deep, rich wood and gold gilt. We showed the room in multicolored electric lights, admittedly a bit anachronistic for 1912, and candles and presents, with a tinsel-covered Christmas tree in the corner, as Joy to the World plays on an Edison phonograph. It's snowing out the window, but the glow of the fireplace radiates warmly off the wood. It's a beautiful, welcoming scene, but ironically, the only people to have ever occupied this cabin were Ida and Isidore Strauss, an elderly Jewish couple. Isidore was the owner of Macy's department store, which, by the way, didn't begin its famous Christmas Day parade until 1924.
The Strausses, along with any other Jewish passengers on these liners, would have celebrated Hanukkah. They were certainly welcome to participate in the Christmas festivities, and they probably would have, but celebrants of Hanukkah were offered their very own accommodations for their holiday. Prior to the 1930s, kosher cooking on these liners was limited to a single chef with a few special pieces of equipment. However, when Germany started removing Jewish accommodation from their liners, British and American ships answered back by expanding their kosher meals into an entire kosher kitchen with their own full staff. They boasted about the amount of effort and expense that went into welcoming the Jewish passengers, giving them a safe place to travel as the Second World War was beginning to brew. Not much is known about the celebration of Hanukkah on these liners, but there definitely would have been something. Hanukkah feasts were obviously prepared by the kosher cooks, and by the 1930s, the larger ocean liners of the Allied powers even had their own designated synagogues on board, where Holy Day services were held. Christian chapels were also on most ships. Protestant services were often held by the captain, as we see on Sunday, April 14th aboard the Titanic. Catholic services were often tucked away. No formal Catholic services were organized, but if a Catholic priest was on board, he was permitted to celebrate Mass in the lower classes only. By the 1930s again, spaces for Catholic services were set aside, though often only in temporary spaces, like on the Queen Mary.
Queen Mary did not have chapels, so in first class there you see the drawing, the photograph of the drawing room as it looked originally. This panel here, which is in the museum now, folds back and exposes an altar where they had Mass. So Mass in first class here. In second class, the second class library had the same arrangement. A panel would fold back, expose an altar for Mass in second class.
On French ships, however, with France being a mostly Catholic country, large chapels were adorned almost to the same degree they are on land, such as on the SS Normandy. Religious services were available in each of these sanctuaries respectively for the more faithful on the different holidays. But back to the festivities. By the 1920s and 30s, the concept of cruises were becoming popular, and the idea of devoting an entire cruise to celebrating Christmas was actually beginning to take off. In 1933, the White Star Line was offering extended cruises on their 35,000-ton steamer Homeric. A 16-day Christmas cruise through the Mediterranean offered a fine and luxurious way to end the year. These cruises, however, were offered very near to the end of the White Star Line, who would be forced to merge with their rival, the Cunard Line, only a few months later, and the Homeric, the Christmas cruise liner, would be scrapped. The idea of Christmas cruises continued through the decades even to today. And while everyone boards their Christmas cruise with high hopes and they're excited for the holiday, things can sometimes go wrong. I have here this luggage tag from the Greek line from about the 1950s or 60s, which brings me into my next story. On December 19th, 1963, the Greek line steamer TSMS Laconia departed Southampton for a Christmas cruise to the Canary Islands. Only a few days after departing, on December 22nd, a fire was discovered in the ship's hair salon, and by midnight the entire ship was ablaze. Distress calls went out and the evacuation commenced, but the ship seems to have been in poor shape. Rusted davits and lifeboat chains broke. Lifeboats fell into the water. The intercoms and warning systems failed, and all hell truly broke loose. British and American ships did arrive on the scene to pick up most of the people from the water, and both the U.S. and Royal Air Force were on site. The U.S. Air Force planes dropped rescue kits, rafts, and life jackets, while the RAF planes radioed positions of survivors in the sea. By the next day, the ship was completely burned out. 128 people were killed, though only 53 were from the flames. The others died of exposure or drowning. By Christmas Eve, tow lines were attached to the smoldering hulk, and over the course of the next few days, the ship listed more and more. By December 29th, with the ship still in tow on the long route to Gibraltar, she rolled over and sank. Several of Laconia's crew were charged with negligence, and the source of the fire was determined to be faulty wiring. Another tragic holiday cruise occurred on New Year's Eve at exactly midnight in 1972, when the SS Poseidon was struck by a rogue wave and capsized during the New Year's celebrations. Thankfully, unlike the Laconia, the story of the Poseidon is entirely fiction, and is the center for the 1972 film The Poseidon Adventure. However, the story is based off of an incident aboard the RMS Queen Mary, where the ship almost capsized at sea. The film is even filmed aboard the Queen Mary after it arrived in Long Beach and was converted into a hotel. All scenes before the disaster are on the real ship, and all scenes in the sinking, overturned wreck are sets based on the real Queen Mary. But the Poseidon Adventure does bring us to the last holiday of the year, New Year's Eve. With most voyages lasting only a week, New Year's Eve is sometimes celebrated on the same voyage as Christmas, but most often not. A big dinner was expected, as evidenced by this 1909 dinner menu from the RMS Lusitania. The passengers and crew would stay up until midnight and count down the hour, and in the midst of the cheering as the new year struck, the orchestra would take up playing Auld Lang Syne, which the cheering celebrants would join in singing. And with that, the calendar is changed and the new year has begun. Traveling on an ocean liner for these holidays may seem like something that was lost with time. Looking back, we might think that to be on the seas, perhaps away from family and friends, would be lonely. But with all of this in mind, it sounds like a wonderful experience that has been lost to time. To once more quote author Charles Welton, "I do not recall a Christmas spent at sea which carried with it even a fraction of an element of desolation. On the other hand, there is deeply graven in memory bright days in which contentment and charity kept step to a round of enjoyment, in which it was my fortune to contribute a feeble share. To fit oneself for a proper contemplation of the period, a calm and peaceful state of mind must be coordinated with a warm and benevolent pulsation of the heart. The voyager is not less apt to possess these qualities than the man at home. Indeed, with the various gentle agencies employed to promote the finer feeling, one may venture to say that in its own way, a Christmas spent afloat under the great starlit canopy of the heavens has no exact counterpart and no distinct superior." Thank you, everybody. Have a Merry Christmas, a Happy Holidays, and a Happy New Year.